I'd like to now introduce Randy Jackson, who's a professor. It used to be the agronomy department. I forget now what its new name is. Plant and agroecology. Yes, that's so rolls right off the tongue. Randy and his Grassland Ecology group study how carbon and nutrients flow into, within, and out of grassland ecosystems. He co-leads the Wisconsin Integrated Cropping Systems Trial and also Grassland 2.0, a USDA-funded project working to transform agriculture to a system that provides for our wants and needs while cleaning water, reducing flooding, and supporting biodiversity. So welcome, Randy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mary. And apologies for rolling in here right at the appointed time, but I just got out of class teaching up in Birch Hall and talking about a lot of the things that I want to talk about today. So I think Aaron set it up beautifully. Like, we have to have a conversation about what is it we're trying to regenerate. And the Grassland 2.0 project that I help lead really sort of leans in on, we've got to restore the function of the original prairie to a large degree to our agricultural systems. I don't mean we need to restore prairie wall to wall across the upper Midwest. That would be great. Don Waller and I would love to help with that. In fact, Don's been helping with that for a long time, as have a lot of other folks. But I'm talking about the function of the original prairie, which was that it actually accumulated carbon, it actually built soil, it actually supported and enhanced biodiversity, it actually cleaned our waters. And we have to have agricultural systems that do that moving forward into the 21st century. There's just no two ways around it. We can't compromise anymore. So it's very much a flag planting. Grassland 2.0 is the vision for what agriculture can and should be. As Aaron mentioned, there is an agricultural system that largely does that now, and that is well-managed rotational grazing on perennial grasslands. The grasslands might not be the native grasslands of the original prairie, but they perform a lot of the functions, not all, but a lot of the functions that the original prairie grasslands did. And so that's a step in the right direction, as Aaron was just pointed out when I walked in right in the middle of that. Sorry, Aaron, but thank you. As Aaron also pointed out, critical to restoration is restoring people to the landscape. I don't think I have to regale you with the numbers, but we are losing a devastating number of farms every year in Wisconsin. I think, so I got here in 2003 from California, and there were, I think, around 16,000 dairy farms, and now there's fewer than 6,000. We lose about 500 dairy farms a year. Consolidation is devastating for local communities, absolutely devastating for people. Suicide rates reflect this, and community vitality reflects this. We've got to find ways to get more people back out onto the land. So the Grassland 2.0 vision, while it's flag planty, a lot of people get a little nervous and squeamish about how flag planty it is. Nonetheless, we've had a lot of partners, and part of what we're trying to do is generate more enthusiasm and excitement around this idea that we must have a different kind of agriculture. And so there are a lot of folks that are part of this conversation, and the NASCAR stickers continue to grow. I'm not going to walk through all this, but it's an exciting time. So we do agriculture in grasslands. The grassland biome is where we do agriculture. And of course, we try and carve out a lot of forest and make more grassland so that we can do more agriculture in lots of places of the world. But in North America, most of our agriculture is done in grassland, and in this part of the world, what we've been temporarily referring to as the Corn Belt is the tallgrass prairie. And the tallgrass prairie is still here. It's mostly beneath our feet. It's mostly below ground. That's where most of the energy and carbon that accumulated for 3,000, 4,000 years in the tallgrass prairie is. And it's still there, a lot of it, although we've done our best to wear it down and wear away at it. Oh, somebody snuck a mugshot in there of somebody burning some grassland. But this original prairie, it accumulated soil. It built meters deep mollisols that we've cracked open and taken advantage of their energy. And we've done our best to vent off that carbon to the atmosphere. So this is a picture of a farm field out in the driftless area on June 1st last year. And I couldn't help, I pulled my car over. Of course, I was driving a big old SUV burning fossil fuel. So yeah. Let me just get my positionality right here. Yeah. But I pulled over and I was like, wow, there's a June 1st farm field that's probably looked exactly like that since about October 15th. That's just a big carbon vent to the atmosphere. We can't do this anymore. And I know that there are lots of folks who are trying to do something different, but I drove from St. Louis to Madison on a 5-hour road trip from the agronomy meetings this year. And this is what most of Illinois looks like. And this is what a lot of Wisconsin looks like for over 6 months of the year. It's just a big carbon bin. And it gets worse when you start adding up the fossil fuels that are combusted to till the soil and the nitrous oxide that comes off when we add the fertilizer, et cetera. So here's my depiction of what's happened here since this time of cultivation. That's time 0 on the x-axis there. If we had about 90 megagrams per hectare of carbon, of organic matter, excuse me, in the soil at the time of initial cultivation, within about 25 or 30 years, we had vented off about half of that carbon to the atmosphere and then continue to wear it down throughout the 20th century. Let me be clear, this is not me blaming farmers. This is simply the system that we've developed. This is where we're at. And we have to find ways to get on a new trajectory where we restore the function of the original grassland so that we're actually at least holding on to the carbon that's in the soil now, but better yet, building it again. And it's, of course, not just a carbon story, it's a water quality story. I'm not blaming this farmer for this situation. That plays out all too often across the Wisconsin landscape. This is the system that they are faced with, that we push them to do, where they're pushed to produce as much as they possibly can, to extract as much as they possibly can out of the land and the animals. And they result in having more manure and nutrients on hand than they know what to do with. And they have to spread it. Otherwise, the manure lagoon is going to overflow. This is a massive, massive water quality problem. Here's Lake Mendota this summer. I don't have to regale you with all the problems that we have in terms of water quality, but it's getting worse, and it's devastating for wildlife, and it's devastating for recreation. Here's a map of the impaired water bodies of Wisconsin. It's basically an overlay of where CAFOs are distributed around the landscape, sorry. And as I mentioned, this is devastating to local communities. The consolidation that's pushing more and more CAFOs. I skipped over a slide here that's super important, which is to say that in 1994, we had about 6 CAFOs in the state. Now we have 370, I think, or something like that. This is devastating for communities, not just in terms of the consolidation that's hollowing out their social systems, but the water quality issues that are resulting from this consolidation are massive. And as we've heard from our federal government quite recently, that's the system. Get big or get out. Devastating. Okay, our immense problems require transformative change. It's a massive, massive problem. We're not going to just tweak it and fix it. The current system is fundamentally flawed. We've got to restore the function of the original system, well-managed grasslands on perennial well-managed grazing on perennial grasslands, help the land heal. They can actually help hold on to, maybe build carbon in the soil. But the impediments to this change are not in the agronomy department. Oh, wait, they are. That's why we changed our name. The impediments to change are largely socially constructed. They're not if we only knew more. That's what I mean by they're not in the department, the agronomy department. We don't just need more science. I mean, more science is good, let's do that. But we know what we have to do, and the impediments are socially constructed. Fundamentally, productivism. We've got to find a way to recenter this narrative so that the starting point of every agronomy paper isn't, we've got to feed 10 billion people by the year 2050. We produce enough calories now to feed 10 billion people. We produce enough calories to feed 12 billion people. It's a political problem. It's a social inequality problem. It's not a productivity problem. There's social stigma attached to change that is devastating. It's really hard to be the first guy in the suburbs to take out your lawn and put in a rock garden when everybody else has lawns. I get that. It's not endemic to farmers. We've got to find a way to change the narrative so that change and doing something less than extracting everything that's possible out of the system is the norm. I don't have all the answers here, by the way. I'm just waving my arms about what we need to do. Oh, and I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. We've got to have policies and markets that don't ignore externalities, positive and negative externalities. We've got to have policies and markets that pay people to clean water, that pay people to build soil, that pay people to produce healthy, nutritious foods. And we need more technical support. The university, the academia has a huge role to play here in developing more and more folks who are helping recenter the narrative and train people and guide people and pull people in the right direction. All right, so that's the end of my Bernie Sanders. Here's all the problems with the world. Let me talk about what the Grassland 2.0 project is trying to do, trying to operationalize things here a little bit. So if we have this meta context, which is academic speak for the system, that nobody can seem to change because there's no levers, there's no agency, nobody has agency there. What we really think in Grassland 2.0 is that the way to make change is to bring people together for collective action at sort of regional to local scales. Hey, the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection is doing this to a large degree with producer-led watershed groups. We've got to double down on that. NRCS is doing this with demo farm networks. We got to double down on that, triple down on that, keep bringing people together so that people come together and collectively demand something different, so that the politicos and the power structures and all the people in the system, whoever that is, that's not a view, I know, actually will be responsive. And that's the only way that transformative change has happened over the millennia, is when people collectivize and demand that change happens. And then, of course, individuals, we've got to keep working with individuals and helping them identify what's possible. And that's largely what we do now, say in extension. It's largely what we do in NRCS and in DACCAP and in DNR, work with individuals. We've got to keep doing that, but we just need more and more and more of it. If we're going to move from the current system to a new climate smart, quote unquote, system, we've got to come together around this concept of collaborative landscape design. We can call everything, anything you want. Collaborative landscape design is our academic speak for it, but it's like get people together and intentionally create the future for your place. My social scientist friend John Strouser calls it placemaking. And so we've got to come together and do that, and that's what we're trying to do in Grassland 2.0. We work in these learning hubs where local folks have basically raised their hand and said, we want to do that. We want to try this collaborative landscape design. The darker areas here are the learning hubs that we currently have funding for. The other areas are places where people have raised their hand and said, we want to do that. Let's find some funding for it. And so we're actively trying to find more funding for it and more support for collaborative landscape design. The dimensions of collaborative landscape design are these 5 dimensions. The first is that we work hard to connect people, and that's just sort of an abstract way of saying bring people together and continue to find ways and look for ways to actively bring more and more people, especially people that don't usually talk to each other, especially groups that don't see eye to eye. How do we get them to the table to explore a collective vision? And that's hard work, and we're 4 years into this project now, and we're made a little progress. But we see that it's the long game. We have to keep doing it. We have to keep accreting more and more groups and organizations to the conversation. Our idea is that over time, after enough trust and buy-in happens, we can start to actually develop some scenarios that identify shared goals and identify pathways to getting to those shared goals. So this is all built on some work that Chris Kucharik and his grad student Tracy Campbell published a couple of years ago that focused on the Yahara River watershed and basically looked at the Yahara River watershed, built some models of the landscape, and back calculated in order to meet the EPA mandated TMDL phosphorus goals for the Yahara River watershed. I don't remember what they are off the top of my head, but it's something like going from 95,000 pounds of phosphorus per year to 45,000 pounds. In order to do that, we simply have to have half as many livestock in the watershed, 50% reduction of the livestock. 50% of the ag land needs to be in perennial grass. That's an and. Half as many livestock and half of the ag land in perennial grass. And it has to be that way for 50 years And after 50 years, we'll meet the EPA mandated TMDL goal. It's a massive, massive problem. It's not going to get fixed with little tweaks on the edges. It's not going to be buffer strips. It's not going to be cover crops. It's not going to be no-till. It's a different system. And that's sort of the impetus and the drive behind Grassland 2.0. So if we're going to have to transform the system to get clean water, let's get intentional about designing that. What does it mean for people? What does it mean for the farmers? What would they have to do differently to get us there? How do we as a society incentivize that and support it and make it cool and exciting and sexy? That's the nugget we're trying to crack. So we help them envision what's possible. We help them plan their own farm enterprises. And invariably you get to this point where it's like, okay, great, I'm all in. I see Tim Bay over there, he's all in. He wants to do grass everywhere. But who's gonna buy my shit, he would say. Sorry for the colorful language. It would probably be even more colorful.
Yeah, he knows me.
So we gotta start talking about how to design new supply chains that demand these kinds of products. We gotta work with the powerful. We gotta work with General Mills. We gotta work with foremost, the co-ops, et cetera. And that's what we're trying to do in this designing supply chains bit. And then finally, this incentivizing and managing change business is kind of about, like in academic speak, governance. We've got to stand up local systems for sort of checking and balancing what we're doing, and so that we can actually be adaptive and change, because there are going to be shocks to the system. There's going to be pandemics. There's going to be market failures, et cetera. And so some way that we can govern ourselves, incentivize ourselves to do the right thing, to move forward with a new transformed system, but then also be adaptive and flexible along the way. Am I out of time?
It would be good if you finished soon.
I'm going to finish soon.
Use that every day.
I just heard it emerge. I asked my students, like, is this enough? And they were like, you've got to get to your next thing. All right, let me skip through the rest of my slides that all of my students want to see. That's what we're doing.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, a lot of stuff.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know Aaron was going to take all my time. So anyway, what I just skipped through is, like, we're doing a whole bunch of stuff to try and help stand up a new academy that we're working with NRCS on. The Grassland 2.0 Academy is about trying to churn out more and more people who are working in this space of trying to recenter the narrative, to make it normal and cool and sexy to do agriculture that actually repairs and heals and takes care of the land rather than extracts and degrades the land. In general, we're trying to do these three things: inspire conversations about what's possible. It's really hard to crack out of, for all of us, to crack out of the constraints of today, the calculus of today. I got to go do this next talk, so I can't do this. With farmers, it's usually like, I just got to go milk, or I got to go fix that thing that broke. I can't think about the future. So we really are working hard to try and create space to invite farmers to these conversations, to pay them to come to these conversations, to feed them pizza and beer, and like encourage them to get outside the calculus of today and think, like, what do you want from the future? What do you want your kids and your grandkids to have? Do you want them to farm? The answer is usually no. The answer is usually no.
Yeah.
But when we start talking about an agriculture that is part of the solution, the answer is often yes. And I'll tell you, there were 220, well, there was probably like 160 students in my class a minute ago. And a lot of them, their eyes are like, I want to be part of this agriculture that's part of the solution. I don't want to be part of agriculture that's the problem. So how do we get there and how do we do it is a big part of this, trying to inspire what's possible. The academe has a huge role to play here with models and data and what could it look like and what's possible in that regard. And then we got to grow agriculture in the image of the original prairie. It doesn't have to be prairie. Don and I will go out and we'll try and help some prairie establish here and there, but we need a lot more grassland on the landscape. It's got to be the sort of the matrix. It's got to be the dominant form of agriculture. It's got to be the dominant way we produce livestock. And of course, we got to grow other crops too. I'm not saying we don't need all these other crops, we do. But we certainly don't need 75% of our landscape feeding our gas tanks and feeding livestock in Nebraska. So that's the Grassland 2.0 vision. Thanks, Mary.
Randy.